and actually had an opportunity to join either the FBI or Google. And I asked both the recruiters like who I should join, and even the Google recruiter was like, "Oh, you got to join the FBI, right?" And they signed me for a very small amount of money, and then signed LeBron James a week or two later. So it ended up being great for that business, and most of the startup money goes into computer science, like the engineering college or the business school, which are both great programs. But College of Art and Science is the largest college in the university, and I would advise most people not to be a startup founder. It's really hard. And the first 5 years I spent essentially learning how to do it. A very difficult life path, almost impossible. One thing we've learned about Gen Z and the aughts is they're always kind of like this, right? So they have a phone in front of their face, and if they're applying to other jobs, they're using.
Hey, today we've got Michael Jacobs, former FBI Counterintelligence Analyst turned serial founder, and now leading SpringRoll AI and teaching at UC Berkeley. Good to see you.
Thanks for the invite, Danny.
Absolutely. Well, I definitely want to dive into your project you're working on now, the reason why we decided to do this episode. But before that, just to better understand your background and for the audience who might not know you, it seems like you have a great story, FBI, startups, Silicon Valley. So if you want to share that, we can start from here.
Sure. So I went to Berkeley as an undergrad, then did what everyone told me to do and applied for all these PhD programs, and ended up in a PhD program. And I actually left it when I realized I didn't want to be a professor. Right. So I felt like I had more to do at the time outside of academia. It also happened to be 2007. Right. So there were literally almost no jobs. So worked really hard and thought about like, hey, what can I do with my time that I'd like? And I've always loved the United States. I'm thankful for my opportunity. Applied for a couple federal positions and ended up in the FBI, and actually had an opportunity to join either the FBI or Google. And I asked both the recruiters like who I should join, and even the Google recruiter was like, "Oh, you got to join the FBI." So I was like, "Hey, this is a no-brainer." So I ended up in counterintelligence in San Francisco and did some like really fascinating work. And I was on a task force that essentially worked with defense contractors, and I would go and talk to them about counterintelligence issues that may or may not be, especially at the time, so obvious to people, right? So, through the course of that, I realized I'm more of a founder because we had a lot of clear defense contractors that were actually small startups, right? And I was like, wow, I'm way more like all of these guys and some women than most of the people I'm in the office with. So I thought about it for some time, and I realized I was going to put in my resignation. Ended up getting nominated for the National Counterintelligence Award, but I already decided I was going to resign. So I literally resigned the day I learned that I was nominated for that. So I don't even know what I was nominated for as far as that goes. But, that started my path in startup foundership. And if you don't know much about it, I would advise most people not to be a startup founder. It's really hard. And the first 5 years I spent essentially learning how to do it. A very difficult life path, almost impossible. 5 years of, I would say, epic failure, but there was nothing epic about it. And eventually I ended up getting my first opportunity from Dan Gilbert, who owned at the time Quicken Loans, which is now Rocket Companies, and the Cleveland Cavaliers. And I proposed creating an in-seat like commerce system for the Quicken Loans Arena, which is now I think called the Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse, right? And they signed me for a very small amount of money, and then signed LeBron James a week or two later. So it ended up being great for that business, and that business does a few billion in GMV every year now. It's in maybe 250 different stadiums in the US, Canada, and Mexico. It's ultimately just like a omni-channel retailing platform that helps modernize how people get food, beverage, buy merchandise, et cetera, in stadiums. There's a lot of cool things to it. Sold that, and then started a company that worked with restaurants, which I thought correctly that would be a much larger opportunity. I'd learned a lot about starting companies, and that grew to be relatively large. We worked with tens of thousands of restaurants, and we helped them sign up for all the different online ordering platforms, which ironically saved at least, 10,000 restaurants during COVID, probably more than that when you add in all of the copycat competitors that we had. But ultimately made it really easy for them to sign up for like Grubhub, DoorDash, Uber Eats, Postmates, etc. And learned a lot about entrepreneurship, sold my stake in that and tried to figure out, hey, what am I going to do next? And then ultimately I ended up at UC Berkeley in a program where I'm now mentoring startup founders in the College of Letters and Science, which gets overlooked because most of the startup money goes into computer science, like the engineering college or the business school, which are both great programs. But College of Letters and Science is the largest college in the university, and the major cognitive science has a lot to do with artificial intelligence, which, I'm currently working on a couple of really interesting AI projects related to the DoD.
Yeah, well, I mean, an amazing story, a lot of impact. It's going to be a super great conversation, especially learning some of the stories from you and how to succeed. And then fast forward to 2025, you mentioned you work with the DoD, multiple projects. Let's talk about this. Tell me about this recruiting platform you guys work on, what it is, what's the story behind it, how it's gonna work. Ideally, I think I might put the link in the video to the website if it's already live. If it's not, I'll do that later. But yeah, I'll let you take it from here.
Yeah. So last year, one of my friends who was actually part of my first startup reached out to me and said, hey, I have an idea. And back then, there was still a recruiting crisis that everybody heard about. And there's multiple reasons for that, which I'm not going to get into. But when we started talking to actual recruiters from the Army, Navy, and the different branches, we learned that most of the branches are still kind of knocking door to door, cabling at schools. There's really not a lot of technology in place. One thing we've learned about Gen Z and the aughts is they're always kind of like this, right? So they have a phone in front of their face, and if they're applying to other jobs, they're using their phone. So our first thoughts were like, okay, so how do we actually make this simple for Gen Z and the aughts, everybody coming up, to learn about military service and figure out, like, hey, based on their knowledge, their skills, abilities, and their interests, like, hey, how can we get them to understand like the top 2 or 3 different military occupations that might be a good fit for them? And talking to a recruiter, thinking back to when I was 17, 18, the couple times a recruiter talked to me, they never offered me something that was interesting, right? It was always about infantry, etc. I would have loved to be an Air Force pilot, but that would never have worked out. But I didn't know about any of the other ones, and the recruiters that I happened to run into didn't know much about the hundreds of MOSs that are available. So so we built Joe, Joint Operations for Enlistment, which is a little bit more than a chat bot. It's a career counselor, and it spends a little bit of time talking to you, 10, 20 questions. The last 10 questions are actually super abbreviated ASVAB that I designed. And we can match any candidate with their top 3 MOSs in the Army right now, right? So it's live. We're live in Florida with 28 different recruiting stations. And, we're getting ready to send an email to most of the high school seniors coming in, which should be amazing.
Yeah, so this definitely sounds like a very interesting product. What I'm curious about is recruiting is a long process. You have to incentivize a person, they have to have some interest. So my understanding is that you guys come in not from the start. You don't advertise, you don't do any kind of marketing, but when a person is already interested, your tool helps them identify what kind of MOS might be a good fit for them or what's interesting for them might be in the military. Is that a right assessment, or do you do more than that?
Yeah, a little bit more than that we're going to release later. But think about it from this perspective. Most of the folks that actually enlist in the military these days, they come from a military family background. So you have most of the target market in the 17, 18-year-olds today who would be great, who love this country, who would be great in the military. They just don't know much about it. And our goal is to help them understand more about the military. Like I was just on the phone with a venture capitalist who very smart guy, and he ended up in the Marine Corps, and he had three different options of MOSs given to him. One was infantryman, another was mortarman, and I think there was, I forget what the other one is, but he chose mortarman, right? So, but this is a very like this guy, he probably would have stayed in the service had he had a more comprehensive assessment in the beginning. And this is somebody who could have become a general, right? And instead he was a mortarman, and he was there for his contract, and he left, right?
And do you work with all of the branches, or only the Army, or the Navy, Marine Corps? What's the long-term plan here?
Long-term plan is to work with everyone, especially the Army and Navy, who need to recruit the most people. Right now, we're working with the Army, and we're going to be chatting with folks about expanding that actually tomorrow. So I don't know, but it's great working with the Army. And some of the other conversations are actually about helping veterans, like following our candidates through their recruitment process, through their term of service, helping offer them different work should their initial MOS, et cetera, not go the way they're expecting. But then also as they exit the service, understanding, hey, based on what they've done, what some great jobs for them would be in large organizations in the private sector would be, right? So, and then helping connect them to the right people at some of these large organizations. For instance, some of the clear contractors that create some of the, let's say, helicopters, tanks, et cetera. If the person in service was actually repairing these tanks, why not go help make them afterwards, right? And connecting the dots and ensuring that they have a long-term career. That's great, because as I'm sure most of the people listening know, one of the largest problems with veterans is once they leave the service, they don't find a job or a career that suits them for the rest of their life, right?
Yeah, and another aspect of it is, and this is what I've learned from my guests, all the way from NCOs to general officers, is mentorship is important. And I wonder if your platform could also enable connecting young officers or NCOs or soldiers to mentors, or maybe even veterans, as you said, not only connecting them to the jobs, but also to their potential mentees, and incentivizing that as well.
Yeah, that's definitely part of the conversation, especially on the veteran end, right? And we wouldn't want to jump in and interfere with the process once someone enlists, right? And they go to boot, et cetera. But once they exit the service, or even the 6 months beforehand, helping connect them to the right people from industry, ensuring that they have a soft landing for me, but also even more so for my co-founders on the project, who are, a couple of them are actually Navy SEALs. That's why they took the project on.
Yeah, and I know that some of the veterans are listening to this episode, maybe even active duty people serving in the US Army. If a person is interested to support you, or maybe even a young person who is considering joining the military, could they go to your website today and start, engaging with the platform, or is it a little too early to
Yeah,
do that?
yeah. So they could we could put a link up, and everyone uh that has a conversation, assuming their answers qualify them for service, will actually get a recruiter in Florida is going to reach out to them to see about their service.
And is it only in Florida as of today?
As of today, we're only in Florida, but the recruiters in Florida can talk to anyone in the nation, and they can make the right connections for a local office.
Got it. Curious to ask you a few questions about the business side of things, because I have a background in startups as well, and I understand a little bit about this process. So is this company, is it a nonprofit, a for-profit, and how does the business model work?
Well, for profit, and we contracts with the government, right, with the Pentagon related to the recruiting, but also for the veterans, we're more like a recruitment firm that sort of like a headhunter that works with them, but for key hires, because the companies that we're working with all want to hire as many veterans as possible. So it's very important for them.
And before we jump into leadership and those kinds of topics, do you have something to add here about this platform before we move on to the next section?
No, it's, but if anybody wants to try it out and chat and they I'll shoot them a link that I'll get an email when someone from this podcast actually fills it out, and I'll reach out to them personally as well.
Awesome, awesome. Sounds good. Well, your story again is very interesting, coming from the FBI, then working with startups, even teaching at UC Berkeley. Do you have a leadership philosophy when it comes to the civilian sector or working at the FBI? Did your leadership style evolve over the years, or maybe you have some core philosophies that stayed the same?
Yeah, startups are much different than large organizations. So if you're comparing the FBI to, let's say, even UC Berkeley to a startup, I'd say startups are kind of like the Wild West, right? There's, the only value that's ever created in a startup is actual like shit that gets done and results, right? It's 100% results oriented. There's no trophy for second place. There's no participation award. It's binary. You either win or you don't. And other people from the military would have more life and death analogous situations to the startup world, right? Where you're on a small team and you either make it out or you don't, right? But of course, that's much higher stakes. Now, working at a large university like Berkeley, you have to be very cognizant of all of the rules, the regulations, what you can and what you can't do, and work within those guidelines, right? It's more important to ensure that everybody is happy with what you're doing. In startups, everyone can hate you, but as long as the money's coming into the company, you're winning and it's fine, right? Much different environment. Now, somewhere in between, you have the working for the FBI, where so I spent most of my time in the counterintelligence unit that I was at, and some time in intelligence, which is more like resource planning and gathering information, et cetera, which to tell you the truth, I promptly asked to get switched to actual investigations because, I didn't find it to be fulfilling. It's not who I am. But what I will say is that that's kind of in the middle, right? Because you have your rules, you have your regulations, you have your requirements and priorities, but there's still this, hey, did you actually figure something out that's important? Did you actually, like in the case of talking to the contractors, did I actually talk to contractors that matter, that were working on strategic technologies that were key assets, critical national assets to the U.S. Department of Defense? And did I make a difference there, right? There's 1,000% that's critical. In the case of figuring out counterintelligence, figuring out like, hey, was something stolen? That's probably a more important question than like who did it, to tell you the truth, because in defense, if you know that a technology is compromised, you can't use it, right? So anyhow, I would say it's kind of like a spectrum of there where each one's a little bit different. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. What you mentioned at the start about startups, that it's very hard, nearly impossible to succeed as a startup founder. So in 2025, it is, what is it, July 14th, 2025. If I go to the Silicon Valley, how hard it is to find an angel investor and to get I don't know, $500,000 of initial funding for my project. Is it possible today? Can I just throw a word AI on the pitch deck and become a millionaire, or what's the state of the of affairs there?
Yeah, just by your question, I know you know the answer, and the answer is no, right? So if you look at raising money, and my companies have raised hundreds of millions of dollars, right? So like VCs are their own sort of beast, where they're only trying to invest, especially at the early stage, in founders and ideas and concepts that can return their fund, right? So there's a power law issue in investing that people can become familiar with. But essentially, if it's a $50 million fund and they're giving people $500,000, they're wondering when you sit down and talk to them if that $500,000 they invest in you can become worth $50 million. And if the answer is no, they're not going to invest, right? That's key fact number one. And then number two, if you're looking at accelerators like Y Combinator and you look at the data, it's somewhere between 85 to 90% of the founders that get in. And whenever you say something publicly, they're very adamant against this, but 85 to 90-ish% of the founders come from one of like 20 different universities across the world, give or take. I forget the exact number. I've run the numbers before. And it's the usual suspects, like Berkeley is one of them. Stanford is one of the main ones. You have Columbia, you have Harvard, you have in Canada. There's one university in Canada that's in that group. There's like 2 universities in the UK. But if you're not in one of those 20 schools, and then if you look at the median age of a founder at Y Combinator is around 25, right? So if you look at people over 30, like me, there's not going to be a lot of us sitting there in Y Combinator, right? In fact, probably none, unless you really know one of the leaders there well, or you're already super famous or rich, then obviously they'll just sign. Or if there's some other extenuating circumstance, right? So they do have some people that are older, but it's not a lot. So you're really looking at a group of people that are in their 20s for the most part and come from about 20 different elite colleges. And so that's the accelerator route. There's other accelerators, but most of them aren't very good. And frankly, since Sam Altman and Paul Graham left Y Combinator, their results aren't that good either, despite all the network effects and everything that they have. It's kind of industry average now, I think, right? But if you're looking from like angel checks, that's more possible. But angel money usually comes from people within your network. So, and I can take a social sciences approach here to describe it as, I'm technically a social scientist too, right? So you can look up the network effects of doing business early stage. So you have a lot of these founders, they've had a job at like Google or Meta or Tesla, like one of the top funds as firms, and then they can raise money from people that they worked with or people that know people that they've worked with, right? And there's always outliers. There's always other instances here. Right. So like I raised money in Ohio even, right? So, and over there, we raised money because we knew Dan Gilbert, right? We were part of the Dan Gilbert's family of companies, and we could talk to the angel groups. We could all of this stuff. So your number one goal as a founder, like if you get dropped off, you jump, let's say you're a paratrooper, similar, paratroop out, your first goal here is to find some housing, and the housing would be like the network that it's at night, you need to get cover. Your cover's the network. You have to get in there. You have to understand who you're talking to. They have to know who you are. They have to trust you. And if you can get some of those to be yes, at that point, you could potentially raise money from the angels, which would be a lot more likely than a VC or an accelerator these days. There's a lot of competition for those, and it's not a fair competition, right? But once you have customers and revenue, that changes. But those numbers have scaled exponentially since 2020, right? So the last cohort of VCs from 2020, 2021, when it was COVID and everything was done remotely, unfortunately, they lost a lot of money, which shouldn't be surprising, right? So that vintage of venture did very poorly. So now they're kind of, let's just say, they're more conservative with their investments, but also there's more competition because AI really does accelerate the potential for growth in sales and revenue, et cetera. And the bars are a lot higher because of that.
Yeah. Appreciate you sharing this because, this is a very honest perspective and you're in the midst of it. So that's super valuable and helpful. And before we wrap up this episode, for the listeners, maybe in their young days, do you have a piece of advice or a couple pieces that you want to share with them? Maybe related to the military service, maybe related to the startups or something completely different. I'll let you give this final word to them.
Yeah. So the biggest thing that you can learn is, hey, you should trust people, but don't trust them too much. when it comes to business. I think Warren Buffett has the best way to phrase this, where he says something to the effect of you should work with people that you like, people that you trust, and people that you admire. And if you don't work with people like that, that's when you end up starting over in business. Or a lot of the exits that people have, like mine, that's when we had to exit. And then ultimately the companies didn't do what they could have. And it's almost always because you pick the wrong people to work with, right? And that goes for co-founders, that goes with investors, that goes with everybody who ends up owning one share of stock in your business. Is put them through that litmus test. Do you like them? Do you trust them? Do you admire them? And if the answer is no to any of those, you should move on.
Well, great advice, great story. Good luck with your project. Super important for the country, for the service, for the military. And yeah, grateful to have you on today, and thank you for spending your time here today.
Thanks, Danny. Thanks for the invite. And any other questions, feel free to reach out. If anybody who fills out that form, if they want, we'll see the chats. You can just ask for me to reach out and I'll see it because I'll get the email. So feel free to chat with our Joe chatbot and I'll be in touch.
Thank you.